Right now, in almost every cell in your body, there's a stretch of genetic code that didn't come from Homo sapiens at all. It came from a different species of human being, one that's been extinct for roughly 40,000 years. If your ancestry traces outside Africa, somewhere between 1 and 2% of your entire genome is Neanderthal, actual inherited DNA sitting inside you right now, which is strange, considering what you've probably been told about Neanderthals your whole life. Hunched, grunting, dragging a club through a natural history diorama, slow, simple, outsmarted into oblivion by the clever ones, by us. But over the last 10 years, the actual evidence has been quietly taking that story apart. The bones, the caves, the DNA itself. And it isn't fringe researchers doing the dismantling. It's the top Neanderthal specialists on the planet. So here's the real question. What if we didn't outsmart them at all? What if we just outlived them? And to be fair, the smarter humans won theory isn't some baseless myth someone made up. Neanderthal skulls really are shaped differently from ours. Longer, lower, with a more sloped forehead. For decades, researchers studying that shape argued it meant real differences underneath. Weaker language ability, a weaker memory, a brain built for tracking the physical world, but not much else. One influential 2013 analysis, led by Oxford's Robin Dunbar, argued that Neanderthals needed so much of their brain just to process a bigger body and sharper eyesight that there was less room left over for complex social thinking, for keeping track of big networks of friends, allies, and trading partners. It's a real theory, built by real scientists, and for years it was close to the consensus. Modern humans out-socialized, out-cooperated, and eventually out-competed our slower-witted cousins right into extinction. Except the theory starts to collapse the moment you actually go looking for the evidence it's supposed to be standing on. In 2014, Paula Villa of the University of Colorado Boulder and Will Robrooks of Leiden University published an exhaustive review of everything used to paint Neanderthals as inferior. Worse tools, no symbolism, no real culture. And found that almost none of it held up under scrutiny. Their conclusion wasn't gentle. There's no solid evidence left to support the idea that Neanderthals were cognitively behind us at all. That's not one scientist being contrarian for attention. That's a full audit of the field, published and peer-reviewed, saying the emperor has no clothes. So if the dumber cousin story doesn't hold up, what does the evidence actually show? Start from the beginning, at a cave system in Spain called Sima de los Huesos, the pit of bones. Researchers have spent decades pulling fossils up a nearly 50-foot vertical shaft. In 2016, geneticist Matthias Meyer at Germany's Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology managed to extract nuclear DNA from 2 of those fossils, some of the oldest human DNA ever recovered. The result? These hominins, who lived around 430,000 years ago, sat firmly on the Neanderthal branch of the family tree, which means Neanderthals weren't some short-lived side experiment. They were already an established lineage, hundreds of thousands of years old. For comparison, our own species, Homo sapiens, has only existed for about 300,000 years total. Neanderthals had already been around for over 100,000 years before we even began. Here's what makes this really interesting. Fast forward to 1990, when cavers broke through a collapsed passage in Bruniquel Cave in southwestern France and found something that didn't look natural more than 1/5 of a mile in. In 2016, archaeologist Jacques Jaubert of the University of Bordeaux finally dated it properly. Structures built from over 400 broken-off stalagmites arranged into low rings, one of them more than 20 feet across, going back 176,500 years, with scorch marks showing fire had been used right on top of them. That's 336 meters from daylight, past the point where any natural light reaches at all. Whoever did this carried fire deliberately into total blackness, worked as a group, snapped hundreds of stalagmites down to a matching length, and built something out of them. And it happened more than 130,000 years before Homo sapiens ever crossed into Europe. Now, here's the part nobody talks about. In 2013, a curator named Davorka Radovčić at the Croatian Natural History Museum in Zagreb was going back through a drawer of century-old fossils from a site called Krapina. She noticed something odd on a set of bird bones. 8 white-tailed eagle talons, all with cut marks, notches, and polish in the exact same places. the kind of wear you'd get from stringing them together and wearing them. Published in 2015, the dating put them at roughly 130,000 years old. That's jewelry, not a tool, not food. A deliberate, symbolic object made from a bird that's genuinely hard to catch, worn on somebody's body roughly 80,000 years before a single modern human ever reached Europe. Somebody looked at a dead eagle and thought, I want to wear that. Which, if you've ever bought something purely for how it looked rather than what it did, is a pretty familiar impulse. But here's where it gets really interesting. In the Zagros Mountains of Iraqi Kurdistan sits Shanidar Cave, famous since the 1960s for what got nicknamed the flower burial, a Neanderthal skeleton found with clumps of ancient pollen underneath it. Quick honesty check, that specific flower detail has actually been complicated since, with newer research pointing to burrowing bees rather than deliberate flowers as the pollen's real source. It's a good example of a field correcting itself in real time, but the burial itself is a different matter. In 2020, Cambridge archaeologist Emma Pomeroy uncovered a new skeleton at that exact spot, one of at least 4 individuals clustered together, dated to somewhere around 60,000 to 70,000 years ago, resting beside a distinctive rock that may have served as a marker. That's not an accident. That's a location people kept returning to, generation after generation, specifically to bring their dead. And this is the one that's brand new, published in July 2026 in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, led by Tom Schoenemann, an anthropologist at Indiana University Bloomington. His team digitally reconstructed the inside of Neanderthal skulls to estimate the volume of more than a dozen different brain regions, then compared them against living modern humans of European and Han Chinese descent. For most of those regions, the 2 living human populations differed more from each other than either one differed from the Neanderthals. Schoenemann's own read on it is blunt. If a Neanderthal walked into a room with you today, you probably wouldn't notice anything different. Now, not everyone agrees. This directly complicates an influential 2018 study out of the University of Tokyo, led by Naomichi Ogihara, which found that Neanderthals averaged a smaller cerebellum, a region tied to language and memory. Ogihara still thinks that difference mattered. Schoenemann thinks it's noise. That's a live argument happening in the field right now, not a settled fact, and it's worth saying so plainly. Which means the smarter species wins framework might be the wrong question to begin with. Naomichi Ogihara, the same researcher who found that smaller cerebellum, actually agrees with his rivals on one thing. He describes what likely happened to Neanderthals using a term borrowed from population genetics. Genetic swamping, not a defeat, an absorption. A small population folded gradually into a much larger incoming one, until there was nothing left to count as separate, and we know this happened at all because of Svante Pääbo, the geneticist who first sequenced the Neanderthal genome and won the 2022 Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for it. His work showed that as Homo sapiens spread out of Africa, we didn't just meet Neanderthals in passing. We had children with them, repeatedly, over thousands of years. So the real story here was never a contest of intelligence. It was a long, uneven merger. So here's the whole shape of it. 430,000 years ago. An established lineage, already surviving Ice Age after Ice Age. 176,500 years ago, fire and construction, deep underground, in total darkness. 130,000 years ago, jewelry. A bird's talon, deliberately chosen and worn. Somewhere around 70,000 years ago, a body laid down on purpose at a place their families kept coming back to. And in 2026, a fresh look at the brain science itself, suggesting the intelligence gap we assumed for a century might barely exist at all. So, back to that piece of code sitting in your DNA right now. If your ancestry traces outside Africa, somewhere between 1 and 2% of your genome is Neanderthal. And it isn't decorative. Some of those inherited genes shape your immune system today, how your body reacts to certain infections. Researchers have even traced part of the variation in how severely people got sick from COVID-19 back to a stretch of Neanderthal DNA on chromosome 3. That's not ancient history sitting behind glass in a museum. That's active, right now, inside you, doing something. We didn't outsmart them. We just absorbed them.